Alright, testing. 1, 2, 3. Right. I am Alicia, and I am talking about human-robot interaction, specifically mediated through electronic pets. So, I'm pretty sure all of us have had some experience with electronic animals, or pets of some kind. There are Tamagotchi, there are Gigapets, there's Poochie and Meowchi, and then there's the Furby. As well as others. So Tamagotchi and Gigapets are the small little egg-shaped devices. They have a small screen with buttons, and there is either a cat or a dog, or in Tamagotchi's case, the little alien critter that you are responsible for caring for. So that's providing food for it and, you know, petting it and giving it attention and all that. And if you neglect it, at least in case of Gigapets, they die. Poochie and Meowchi are dog and cat robots respectively. They have eyes that, you know, show emotion, but they don't have any real sensors or any way of interacting. So all of the devices I just mentioned really aren't that interactive as they could be. And then we have Furby, which is much more interactive. It has a lot of sensors, so it can, for example, react to loud noises and things like that. But we'll get more into that later. So the major thing that makes these toys different than other toys before it, so like stuffed animals or dolls, is these toys are meant to mimic life. Whereas a doll, and they're meant to be interactive. So if you were playing with a doll, there's no real give and take. It is just you or the child or whoever kind of inflicting whatever onto this doll. These toys are programmed to have needs and wants separate from what we might like. And it's actually funny, if you look at, for example, Aibos, which are electronic dogs, a lot of them are programmed to not always do what they're told, because if you want to mimic a live dog, dogs often, for example, don't always answer when they're called, and that kind of stuff. So the idea is to kind of create something that has a mind of its own, so to speak, that has its own independent wants and needs and desires. And a lot of the toys that I mentioned set up to this by kind of mimicking life. So in the case of all of them, they need food and attention and love. And it's not, you know, real food, but there is some process, whether that's, you know, pressing a button or pressing a button on the Furby's mouth to simulate food, like going into its mouth or whatever. The point is it has these needs, or perceived needs. So what I'm really going to be focusing on is something called the emotional Turing test. Now I'm borrowing those phrasing from a Radiolab episode devoted to talking to machines. One of their 3 parts is devoted to Furbies and kind of Furby-human interactions, which is what I'm basing a lot of my project off of. But the idea is kind of looking into these robots mimicking feelings in life. A lot of things we've looked at before focus mostly on mimicking human intelligence and human, you know, ability to understand analogies and kind of that kind of thing, as we've seen with like Metacat and Copycat. But this is looking more at how these robots feel, or how humans feel with them. There's a more social aspect to this, as opposed to Metacat, for example, which is kind of more mathematical and less. It's a bigger challenge, we'll see. So Furby is different than these other ones because it's more interactive. Poochie and Meowchi don't have any sensors. Tamagotchis, I mean, they're these little egg-shaped screens. They don't really have a way of transcending the screen. Furbies, though, interact with their environment, and a lot of work has been put to make Furbies, and a lot of work has gone into making Furbies more interactive, to make them seem like they know what they're doing more, which we'll see. So Caleb Chung is the creator of the Furby, and I'll go more into his background later. But when he created the Furby, he kind of he created 3 rules for kind of what makes it different than a doll, or, you know, what kind of makes it alive in quotes, so to speak. So it has to be aware of its surroundings with sensors, which, once again, at least for a lot of the more commercial toy robots, they're really not that aware of their surroundings. If you can slam a door or, you know, yell or something, and it'll be aware that that happened. Or if you turn it upside down, for example, it'll know that it's upside down. It has to feel and show emotion. So in this case, it's really show emotion. And I'll get more into, you know, the feeling aspect later. But this is done through the ears and the eyes. So the eyes are designed to track the face. They move up and down. The whole thing, by the way, is controlled by one motor, the ears and the eyes together. And the idea is that with eyes, they're, you know, looking at you, and they're able to kind of, you know, appear to be tracking your face. And the ears are kind of meant to show emotion more. So if they're droopy, they're sad, you know, if they're up, they're surprised, and it's a way of, you know, allowing this thing to at least appear to feel. And then it has to learn over time. Now, nowhere in its program is it actually learning over time, but it is programmed to, when you start turning on, as you all probably know, Furby has no off button. So when you start activating it, but it like slowly starts learning English. It starts out knowing Furbish, which is essentially just this gibberish language. And as you have it for longer, it appears to, you know, learn more English as it goes. And then it's also shown by the slowly escalating reaction it has when it's turned upside down. So it starts off kind of, you know, just a little like, you know, me scared, don't like this, to like kind of more loud and unhappy, as you would imagine holding a cat or something upside down would happen to. So this begs the question, does it really feel? We clearly see that it's been designed to mimic all these things, but what's really happening? So there are kind of 2 different opinions that I'm going to be looking at. So Sherry Turkle is an MIT psychoanalyst, and she does a lot with human-computer interaction as a whole, but I'm going to be focusing on a lot of her stuff involving electronic pets and that kind of nature. And then Caleb Chung, who, as I mentioned, kind of is creating the Furby. So Sherry Turkle argues that these robots really aren't feeling anything, but we kind of project feeling onto them. And it speaks more about humans and the way humans relate to other things as opposed to the way the robot is relating or not relating to anything. So relational artifacts is a term that comes up in a lot of her work. I first came across it in this MIT study involving humanoid robots, Kismet and Cog. And the way the study worked is young children and adults were interacting with these robots. You know, they're basically put in a room with it. And, you know, you had kids try to teach it different things. Like, you had one kid try to teach it to say, like, I love you, kind of teaching English, that kind of stuff. And the results of this really kind of illustrated the complicated relations that we have when we talk to machines. Kind of the way people name their Roombas or yell at their computer. There's this kind of disconnect between being aware that it's not quite, you know, living, but you still kind of want to treat it like it is. This is especially illustrated through one part of the study was actually kind of showing the participants the kind of nuts and bolts of the project. So they, like, you know, showed you the wiring and the exact, you know, innards of these robots. So they were really aware that it's not real. But despite that, even being interviewed, like asking questions about these robots after that, they were still prone to using more human-like descriptions for them about how, you know, they must feel or whatever. At one point, I believe Cog had like his arm was broken, and the kids were trying to make it feel better, and there was this kind of disconnect between them knowing that it wasn't like that there's a difference between, like, you know, sick or having something broken in the human sense of the word, and then, you know, electronics, when they break, it's not the same thing. Despite kind of how humans perceive these objects, Sherry Turkle really feels that this says more about how we interact with them as opposed to the robot's own capacity to understand or love or what have you. In contrast, Caleb Chung, so he is not a professor or really involved with academia. He, as I mentioned, designed the Furby, and although he's led a really interesting life, including some time as a mime, in this Radiolab episode that I've talked about, he argues that Furbies do feel emotion, and that the only major difference between a Furby squealing and saying me scared when it's upside down and our own feelings is it's just an issue of complexity. Our kind of input-output reaction to, like, you know, if upside down, be scared, is just a more complex version of what Furby's doing. And this kind of poses an interesting philosophical question of, is Furby really feeling? Sherry Turkle definitely believes it's not, but I mean, how do we gauge for feelings? Especially because when you look at the field of cognitive neuroscience, there's a lot about kind of getting robots to think or being able to kind of solve more complex human problems, but there's no real focus on the kind of emotional side of it. We have the Turing test, you know, so if a robot can speak well enough to pass as human, then it's human, but there's no real similar kind of challenge for feelings. You know, if a robot squeals when it's upside down, is that really feeling? And that's really what I hope to get out of my project. So I hope you guys found this interesting. If you're interested in reading more, here's my bibliography. As you see, there's a lot of Sherry Turkle. And once again, the Radiolab episode that I was referring to is called Talking to Machines, and it's on Radiolab's website. Enjoy.